So far this semester, we've learned a couple different ways to solve quadratic equations. One other method we're going to learn today is called solve quadratics by taking square roots. So we know many ways to solve quadratics, and we're going to review the three that we've already learned. So the first method we learned when we started this unit was solve by graphing. So remember, you were given an equation with a quadratic. Remember, quadratic is when you have an exponent of 2 as your highest degree in the equation. So we have x squared equals 9. So we could use our graphing calculators to figure out the answers to this question. So for our graphing calculator, we just had to identify where the two equations were intersecting. So you entered the left side of the equation into y1, and you entered the right side into y2. So remember, to do that, we hit y equals on our calculator. Clear out whatever's on the screen, so just hit clear if there's anything there. And remember, the left side is y1, and the right side is y2. So for our equation, it's just going to be x squared and 9. Once you graph it, you can get a sense of where the two lines are intersecting. Just going to draw a sketch on our sheet as best as I can. Okay, so to find the solution, we were just looking at those two spots where they were intersecting. So I see two intersections here. So on your calculator, remember to do this, we hit second and trace and down to intersect, number 5. And that gave us that little spider cursor. You got to find it if it's not right there on your screen. You can move left and right. So we're going to move the cursor to where they intersect and hit enter 3 times. So the intersection there, one of my solutions is x equals 3. That's this solution. So now I have to check the other solutions. I'm going to do second, trace, intersect again. This time I'm going to move to the left. And I'm going to hit enter 3 times. My other solution is x equals -3. So this was one method we had learned to solve quadratic equations. Another method we learned was solve by factoring. So remember, for factoring, we were going to turn this problem into 2 sets of factors. So what we want to start off with is identify the factors of the third term here. So the third term is 2. So I'm just looking for what numbers multiply together to give me 2. Well, the two numbers that multiply together to give me 2 are 1 and 2. Then I had to figure out those factors that multiplied to give me that and add to be the middle. So remember, this is when we did our little x. And what numbers multiplied to give me 2 and added up to give me 3. And my two factors here were 1 and 2. So if I'm rewriting this equation, I could factor it as x plus 2 and x plus 1. And now I can solve it. So now we're looking, just like we did with the graphing, we're looking for the solutions. So because of the way we set this up, and it's equal to 0, I can say that either x plus 2 equals 0 or x minus 1 equals 0. And then solving for x equals -2, or x equals +1. And those are my two answers for that problem. So we had solve by graphing, solve by factoring. More recently, we learned how to solve using the quadratic formula. So when we were given a quadratic, we are able to identify the a, b, and c values and plug them into this formula. So notice I chose the same equation as we did last time, and we're going to see if we get the same answers. We should, because both methods are possible to use. So in this problem, my a value is 1, because the coefficient of x squared is 1. My b value is 3, and my c value is 2. So I mistakenly wrote a 1 there, so make sure you change that to a 2 for the c value. So now I'm just going to plug these into the formula. So it's going to be x equals the opposite of b, so opposite of b is minus 3, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times 1 times c. So minus 4 times a times c. So I'm just plugging those values in, all over 2 times 1, or 2 times a. Alright, so now I'm going to start evaluating. The opposite of 3 is just negative 3. Plus or minus the square root of. Remember, on your calculator, we can just type that in directly. I've got 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times 2. And that gives me 1. All over 2. I can evaluate this again. The square root of 1 is 1. And now here's where I can branch my problem into two sets of problems. I have negative 3 plus 1 divided by 2, or negative 3 minus 1 divided by 2. Subtracting on the top, negative 3 plus 1 is negative 2. Negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. Negative 3 minus 1 is negative 4. Divided by 2 is negative 2. So there's my two solutions. And they should match my answer from above. So looking at this, looks like I made a mistake, and I can see my mistake. This should be x plus 1 here. So really I should be subtracting 1, not adding 1. So my solution here is negative 1 as well. So now these two answers match up. So it's a good thing I did both methods, because I can see that I made a mistake on my other problem. Alright, the last method we're going to learn today is solve by taking square roots. So we've learned how to do the undo of operations. Like, for example, adding undoes subtracting, and multiplying undoes division. So we're going to do the inverse of the square function, and the inverse of the square function is square rooting. So now we solved this one graphically before, so I know my answers are going to be 3 or negative 3 based on what we did on the front when we solved by graphing. And if you don't remember, I'll show you here again. See our graph there? That's the same exact equation. Solving this algebraically, to undo a square, you square root it. So on your calculator, second x squared gives me the square root. And now I can just type in the number, and I get 3. Notice your calculator only gives you one answer. This is something the calculator is not able to do to show you that there are two possible solutions with this. And the reason for that is that the calculator is just not programmed to do that. So when we take a square root of x, we're actually getting a positive and a negative answer, which is a possible solution to this problem. Because if you think about this, 3 times 3 is 9. So that's why we know the square root of 9 can be positive 3. But also, negative 3 times negative 3 is also 9. So that's why the square root of 9 could also be a negative number. So make sure in your answers that you have both answers. In order to take square roots, let's look at example 2. The x squared has to be all by itself. So like in example 1, we could take the square root right away because the x squared was all by itself. For example 2, we got to do some manipulating. We got to move the equation around. So I'm going to subtract the 5 and get 2x squared equals 50. And before I can square root, I want to get x squared by itself, so I'm going to divide by 2. So x squared equals 25. Now we know the inverse or the undo of squaring is square root. So x is going to be, remember, plus or minus 5. Because 5 times 5 is 25. and negative 5 times negative 5 is 25. So this is another method of solving quadratic equations. Let's look at the last two examples. Again, we want to get the x squared by itself, so I'm going to subtract 10 from both sides. 3x squared equals 36. Divide by 3. X squared equals 12. Alright, for 12 is not a nice number when you square root it. It's going to give you a decimal that I don't want you to have to write that decimal. So when you square root this answer, and if you square root it and you get a long decimal like that, don't rewrite the decimal. The more exact answer is just to leave it in the square root form. So this answer is acceptable. You can rewrite the answer as plus or minus the square root of 12. Because the square root of 12 gives me a weird number, I don't want to deal with that number. I'm just going to leave it as exact as I can. The other problems we had, 25 was a nice square root, it gave us 5. And 9, we could also square root and got 3. This problem does not let us do that, so that's why we're stopping at this point. And then our last example here, same idea, we're going to try to get this x squared by itself. So I've got x squared equals negative 5. Here's a problem in this one. When you try to square root a negative number on your calculator, you can't do it. It says there's an error. It's a non-real answer. So for this one, we have no solution because no number times itself is going to give you a negative answer. So we can't have a negative be square rooted. And that's the reason for no solution for that one. So I'm going to have you try the other problems where you are going to start solving by taking square roots. Good luck.